So, hello and welcome back yet again to Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, which I have to send some huge apologies to you because I said we would be finishing with this book on Thursday, and evidently I can't count. We only have two chapters left. So we will be finishing it, I guess, on Wednesday because Christine cannot tell days of the week. To be fair, the days of the week do always blend together, and it looks like there is so much more to this book than there is because there is the appendix and notes, which probably tell you all the things that you're supposed to notice in this book as you read through it. I love a good complex story, but if I'm being honest, I have not enjoyed Charles Dickens nearly as much as I thought I would, given his reputation. But I'm sure it's a classic for a reason. It does seem to be a very tragic classic, as my thought that not Charles, but that Sidney was the analog of Eponine from Les Mis seems to be coming true, actually in a slightly even more tragic way, because they switched places. It was kind of set up right at the beginning by always pointing out how very much they appeared alike, although maybe not on close inspection, given the fact that that other prisoner didn't take very long to realize that Sidney wasn't exactly Charles. But it seems to be heading towards a time when we will have no more Sidney Carton. So, with that, we are going to read one chapter tonight and the final chapter tomorrow of Book 3 of Charles Dickens' novel A Tale of Two Cities, and chapter 14 tonight, which is titled The Knitting Done. In that same juncture of time when the 52 awaited their fate, Madame Defarge held darkly ominous counsel with the Vengeance and Jacques Three of the Revolutionary Jury. Not in the wine shop did Madame Defarge confer with these ministers, but in the shed of the wood sawyer, erstwhile a mender of roads. The sawyer himself did not participate in the conference, but abided at a little distance like an outer satellite who was not to speak until required or to offer an opinion till invited. "But our Defarge," said Jacques Three, "is undoubtedly a good Republican, eh?" "There is no better," Vengeance said in her shrill voice, "in France." "Peace, little Vengeance," said Madame Defarge, laying her hand with a slight frown upon her lieutenant's lips. "Hear me speak. My husband, fellow citizen, is a good Republican and a bold man. He has deserved well of the Republic and possesses its confidence, but my husband has his weakness, and he is so weak as to relent towards this doctor." "A great pity," said Jacques Three, shaking his head, with his cruel fingers at his hungry mouth. "It is not quite like a good citizen. It is a thing to resent." "See you," said Madame, "I care nothing for this doctor. He may wear his head, or he may lose it, for all I care. It is all of one to me. But the Evermond people are to be exterminated, and the wife and child must follow the husband and father." "She has a fine head for it," said Jacques Three. "I have seen blue eyes and golden hair there, and they looked charming when Samson held them up." Ogre that he was, he spoke like an epicure. Madame Defarge cast down her eyes and thought a bit. "The child as well," said Jacques Three, with a meditative enjoyment of his words. Has golden hair and blue eyes, and we seldom have a child up there. It will be a pretty sight. In a word, said Madame Defarge, coming out of her short abstraction, I cannot trust my husband in this matter. Not only do I feel since last night that I dare not confide to him the details of my projects, but I also feel that if I delay there is a danger of his giving warning, and then they might escape. That must never be, said Jacques Three. No one must escape. We don't have half enough as it is. We ought to have 60 a day. In a word, said Madame Defarge, my husband has not my reason for pursuing this family to annihilation, and I have not his reason for regarding the doctor with any sensibility. I must act for myself, therefore. Come hither, little citizens. The wood sawyer, who held her in the respect and himself in submission of mortal fear, advanced with his hand on his red cap. Touching those signals, little citizen, said Madame Defarge, that she made to the prisoners, are you ready to bear witness about those signals on this very day? Aye, why not? Said the sawyer. Every day in all weather, from 2 to 4, always signaling, sometimes with the little one, sometimes without. I know what I know. I saw it with my own eyes. He made all manner of gestures while he spoke, as if in incidental imitation of some few of those great diversity of signals he had never seen. Clearly they were plots, said Jacques Three. Transparently. And there is no doubt of this, is there, juryman? Said Madame Defarge, letting her eyes turn to him with a gloomy smile. Oh, you may rely upon the jury, dear citizeness. I can answer for my fellow jurymen. Now let me see, said Madame Defarge, thinking again. Yet once more, can I spare this doctor to my husband? I have no feeling either way. Can I spare him? He would count as one head, said Jacques Three. We really have not enough heads. It would be a pity, I think. He was signaling with her when I saw her, said Madame Defarge. I cannot speak of one without the other, and I must not be silent and trust the case wholly to him, this little citizen here. I'm not a bad witness, you know. The Vengeance and Jacques Three vied with each other in their fervent avowals that she was the most admirable and marvelous witness. The little citizen, not to be outdone, declared her to be a celestial witness. He must take his chance, said Madame Defarge. No, I cannot spare him. You are engaged at 3 o'clock. You're going to see the batch of today executed, and you? This question was to the wood sawyer, who hurriedly replied in the affirmative, seizing the occasion to add that he was the most ardent of Republicans, and that he would be, in effect, the most desolate of Republicans if anything prevented him from enjoying the pleasure of smoking his afternoon pipe in the contemplation of the national barber. He was so very demonstrative here that he might have been suspected, and perhaps he was, by the dark eyes that looked at him out of Madame Defarge's head, of having some small individual fears for his own safety every hour of the day. I, said Madame, am equally engaged at the same place. After it is over, say 8 tonight, come you to me in Saint Antoine, and we will give information against these people at my section. The wood sawyer stated he would be proud and flattered to attend upon the citizeness. Madame, looking at him, made him become embarrassed, and he evaded her glance as a small dog would have done, and retreated amongst his wood, and hid his confusion over the handle of his saw. Madame Defarge beckoned the juryman and the Vengeance a little nearer to the door, and there expounded her further views. She will now be at home, awaiting the moment of his death. She will be mourning and grieving. She will be in a state of mind to impeach the justice of the Republic. She will be full of sympathy with its enemies. I think I should go to her. What an admirable woman! Ah, my cherished! Cried the Vengeance, and embraced her. You take my knitting, said Madame Defarge, placing it in her lieutenant's hands, and have it ready for me in my usual seat. Keep me my normal chair. Go you there straight, for there will probably be a greater concourse than usual today. I willingly obey the orders of my chief, said the Vengeance, and she kissed her cheek. You will not be late? I will be there before the commencement. And before the Thrumbles arrive, be sure you're there, my soul, said the Vengeance, for she had already turned towards the street. Be there before the Thrumbles. Madame Defarge slightly waved her hand to imply she had heard, and could be relied upon to arrive in good time, and so went through the mud and round the corner of the prison wall. The Vengeance and the juryman, looking after her as she walked away, were highly appreciative of her fine figure and superb moral endowment. There were many women at that time upon whom the time had a dreadful disfiguring hand, but there was not one among them more to be dreaded than this ruthless woman now taking her way along the streets. Of a strong and fearless character, of shrewd sense and readiness, of great determination, of that kind of beauty which only seems to impart to its possessor a firmness and animosity, but will strike into others an instinctive recognition of those qualities. The troubled time would have heaved her up under any circumstances, but imbued from her childhood with a brooding sense of wrong and a hatred of the upper class, well, opportunity had developed her into a tigress. She was without pity. If she had ever had virtue to her, it was quite gone now. It was nothing to her that an innocent man was to die for the sins of his forefathers. She saw him not. She saw them. It was nothing to her that his wife was to be made a widow and that his daughter an orphan. That was insufficient punishment, because they were her natural enemies and her prey, and as such they had no right to life. To appeal to her was made hopeless by her having no sense of pity even for herself. She had been laid low in the streets, in any of the many encounters in which she had been engaged, and she would not have pitied herself if she had been ordered to the axe tomorrow. She would have gone to it, not with any softer feeling than a fierce desire to change places with whoever had sent her there. Such a heart Madame Defarge carried under her rough robe. Carelessly worn, it was a becoming robe enough, in a certain weird way, and her dark hair looked rich under her coarse red cap. Lying hidden in her bosom was a loaded pistol. Lying hidden at her waist, a sharpened dagger. Thus accoutred, and walking with the confident tread of such a character, and with the supple freedom of a woman who had habitually walked in her girlhood barefoot and bare-legged on the brown seashore, Madame Defarge made her way along the streets. Now, when the journey of the traveling coach, at that very moment waiting for completion of its load, had been planned out last night, the difficulty of taking Miss Pross in it had much worried Mr. Lorry. It was not merely desirable to avoid overloading the coach, but it was of the highest importance that the time occupied in examining it and its passengers should be reduced to the utmost, since their escape might depend upon the saving of only a few seconds here and there. Finally, Mr. Lorry had proposed, after anxious consideration, that Miss Pross and Jerry, who were at liberty to leave the city, should leave it at 3 o'clock in the lightest wheeled conveyance known. Unencumbered with luggage, they would soon overtake the coach, and passing it and preceding it on the road, would order horses in advance, and would greatly facilitate the progress during those precious hours of the night when delay was most dreaded. Seeing this arrangement, in the hope of rendering a real service in this pressing emergency, Miss Pross took to it with joy. She said that she and Jerry had beheld the coach start, and known who it was that Solomon brought, and had passed some 10 minutes in torture of suspense, and right now they were concluding their arrangements to follow the coach, even as Madame Defarge, taking her way through the streets, now drew closer and closer to the otherwise deserted lodging in which they had had their consultation. "Now, what do you think, Mr. Cruncher?" said Miss Pross, whose agitation was so great she could hardly speak, stand, or move. "What do you think of our not starting from this very courtyard? Another carriage having already gone from here today, it might awaken some suspicion." "My opinion, miss," said Mr. Cruncher, "is as you're right. Likewise, what I'll stand by you, right or wrong." "I am so distracted with fear and hope for our precious ones," said Miss Pross, "that I am incapable of forming any plan. Are you capable of forming any plan, my dear good Mr. Cruncher?" "Respecting a future superior life, miss," said Mr. Cruncher, "I hope so. Respecting any present use of this here blessed old head of mine, I think not. Would you do me the favor, miss, to take notice o' 2 promises and vows what is my wishes for to record in this here crisis?" "Oh, for heaven's sake," said Miss Pross, "record them at once and get them out of the way, like an excellent man." "First," said Mr. Cruncher, who was all in a tremble, and who spoke with an ashy, solemn visage, "them poor things well out of this. Never more will I do it. Never more." "I'm quite sure, Mr. Cruncher," said Miss Pross, "that you never will do it again, whatever it is, and I beg you not to think it necessary to mention more particularly what it is." "No, miss," said Jerry, "it shall not be named to you. Second, them poor things well out of this, and never no more will I interfere with Mrs. Cruncher's flopping. Never again." "Whatever that housekeeping arrangement may be," said Miss Pross, striving to dry her eyes, "I have no doubt it is best that Mrs. Cruncher should have it entirely under her own superintendence. Oh, my poor darlings!" "I go so far as to say, miss, moreover," said Mr. Cruncher, with a most alarming tendency to hold forth as though from a pulpit, "and let my words be took down and took to Mrs. Cruncher through you, that what my opinions respecting flopping is undergone a change, and that what I only hope with all my heart Mrs. Cruncher may be a flopping right now." "Oh, there. I hope that she is, dear man," said Miss Pross, "and I hope she finds it answering all of her expectation." "Forbid it," said Mr. Cruncher, with some more solemnity, and some more slowness, and an additional tendency to hold forth and hold out, "as anything what I ever said, or ever should be wisted upon my earnest wishes for them poor creatures now. Forbid it, as we shouldn't all flop, and get 'em out o' here as a dismal risk. Forbid it, miss. What I say, forbid it." This was Mr. Cruncher's conclusion, after a protracted but vain endeavor to find a better word. And still Madame Defarge, pursuing her way along the streets, came nearer and nearer. "If we ever get back to our native land," said Miss Pross, "you may rely upon my telling Mrs. Cruncher as much as I may be able to remember and understand of what you have so impressively said. And at all events, you may be sure that I shall bear witness to your being thoroughly in earnest at this dread time. Now, pray let us think, my esteemed Mr. Cruncher, please let us just think." Still Madame Defarge, pursuing her way along the streets, came closer and closer. "If you were to go before," said Miss Pross, "and stop the vehicle and horses from coming here, and we were to wait somewhere for me, don't you think that would be best?" Mr. Cruncher allowed that it would. "Where could you wait for me?" said Miss Pross. Mr. Cruncher was so bewildered that he could think of no locality except for the Temple Bar. Alas, the Temple Bar was hundreds of miles away, and Madame Defarge was drawing very near indeed. "By the cathedral door," said Miss Pross. "Would it be much out of the way to take me in near the great cathedral door between the towers?" "No, miss," said Mr. Cruncher. "Then, like the best of men," said Miss Pross, "go to the post-house straight away, and make the change." "I'm doubtful," said Mr. Cruncher, hesitating and shaking his head, "about leaving of you, you see. We don't know what might happen." "Heaven knows we don't," said Miss Pross. "But have no fear for me. Take me in at the cathedral at 3 o'clock, or as near as you can, and I am sure it will be better than our going from here. I feel quite sure of it. Now there, bless you, Mr. Cruncher. Think not of me, but of the lives that may depend upon us both." This exordium, and Miss Pross's 2 hands in quite as agonized entreaty touching his, decided Mr. Cruncher. With an encouraging nod or two, he immediately went out to alter the arrangements, and left her by herself to follow as she had proposed. That, having originated a precaution which was already in the course of execution, was a great relief for Miss Pross. The necessity of composing her appearance so that it should attract no special notice in the streets, another relief. She looked at her watch, and it was 20 minutes past 2. She had no time to lose, but must get ready at once. Afraid, in her extreme perturbation, of the loneliness of the deserted rooms, and half-imagined faces peeping behind every open door, Miss Pross got herself a basin of cold water, and began laving her eyes, which were swollen and red. Haunted by her feverish apprehensions, she could not bear to have her sight obscured for a minute at a time by the dripping water, but constantly paused and looked around to see that there was no one watching her. In one of those pauses, she recoiled and cried out, for she saw a figure standing in the room. The basin fell to the ground broken, and the water flowed to the feet of Madame Defarge. By strange stern ways, and through much straining blood, those feet came to meet that water. Madame Defarge looked coldly at her, and said, "The wife of Evrémonde, where is she?" It flashed upon Miss Pross's mind that the doors were all standing open, and would suggest the flight. Her first act was to shut them. There were 4 in the room, and she shut them all. She then placed herself before the door of the chamber which Lucy had occupied. Madame Defarge's dark eyes followed her through this rapid movement, and rested upon her when done. Miss Pross had nothing beautiful about her. Years had not tamed the wildness or softened the grimness of her appearance, but she too was a determined woman in a different way, and she measured Madame Defarge with her eyes to the inch. "You might, from your appearance, be the wife of Lucifer," said Miss Pross. Nevertheless, you shall not get the better of me. I'm an Englishwoman." Madame Defarge looked at her scornfully, but still with something of Miss Pross's own perception that they were two at bay. She saw a hard, tight, wiry woman before her, as Mr. Lorry had seen the same figure of a woman with a strong hair in years gone by. She knew full well that Miss Pross was the family's devoted friend, and Miss Pross knew full well that Madame Defarge was the family's malevolent enemy. "On my way yonder," said Madame Defarge, with a slight movement of her hand towards the fatal spot, "where they reserve my chair and knitting for me, I came to make my compliments to her in passing. I wish to see her." "I think that your intentions are evil," said Miss Pross, "and you may depend upon it, I will hold my own against them." Even spoken in her own language, neither understood the other's words, but they were both watchful and intent to deduce from look and manner what those words might mean. "It will do her no good to keep herself concealed from me right now," said Madame Defarge. "Good patriots will know what that means. Let me see her. Go tell her I wish to see her. Do you hear me?" "If those eyes of yours were bedwinches," said Miss Pross, "and I was an English four-poster, they shouldn't lose a splinter of me. No, you wicked foreign woman, I am your match." Madame Defarge was not likely to follow these remarks in detail, but she so far understood them as to perceive that she was set at naught. "Woman, imbecile, and pig!" said Madame Defarge. "I take no answer from you. I demand to see her. Either tell her I demand to see her, or stand out of the way of the door and let me go to her." This was said with an explanatory wave of her arm. "I little thought," Miss Pross said, "that I should ever want to understand your nonsense language, but I would give all I have, right down to the clothes I wear, to know if you suspect the truth or even a part of it." Neither of them for a single moment released the other's eyes. Madame Defarge had not moved from the spot where she stood when Miss Pross first became aware of her, but she now advanced one step. "I'm a Briton," said Miss Pross, "and I'm desperate. I don't care an English twopence for me. I know the longer I keep you here, the greater hope there is for my ladybird. I'll not leave a handful of that dark hair on your head if you lay a finger on me." Thus, Miss Pross, with a shake of her head and a flash of her eyes between every rapid sentence, and every rapid sentence a whole breath, thus Miss Pross, who had never struck a blow in her life, was now prepared. But her courage was that of emotional nature, and it brought the irrepressible tears up to her eyes. This was a courage that Madame Defarge so little comprehended as she would mistake as weakness. "You poor wretch," she laughed. "What are you worth? I address myself to that doctor." She raised her voice and called, "Citizen Doctor, wife of Evrémonde, child of Evrémonde, any person but this fool, answer the Citizeness Defarge." Perhaps the following silence, perhaps some latent disclosure in the expression upon Miss Pross's face, perhaps a sudden misgiving, apart from either suggestion, whispered to Madame Defarge that they were gone. 3 of the doors she opened quickly and looked in. "These rooms are all in disorder. There has been hurried packing. There are odds and ends upon the ground. There is no one in that room behind you. Let me look." "Never," said Miss Pross, who understood the request as perfectly as Madame Defarge had understood that answer. "If they are not in that room, they are gone, and can be pursued and brought back," said Madame Defarge. As long as you don't know whether they're in that room or not, you're uncertain what to do, said Miss Pross to herself. And you shall not know that if I can prevent your knowing it. And know that or not know it, you will not leave here as long as I can hold you. I have been in the streets from the first. Nothing has stopped me. I will tear you to pieces, but I will have you away from that door, said Madame. We're alone at the top of a high house in a solitary courtyard. We're not very likely to be heard, and I pray for the bodily strength to keep you here. Well, every minute you are here is worth 100,000 guineas for my darling, Miss Pross said. Madame Defarge made at the door. Miss Pross, on the instinct of the moment, seized her around the waist in both her arms and held her tight. It was in vain for Madame Defarge to struggle and strike at Miss Pross. Miss Pross, with the vigorous tenacity of love, always so much stronger than hate, grabbed her tight, and even lifted her from the floor in the struggle they had. The two hands of Madame Defarge buffeted and tore at her face, but Miss Pross, with her head down, kept her held around the waist and clung to her with more than the hold of a drowning victim. Soon, Madame Defarge's hand ceased to hit and felt at her encircled waist. "It's under my arm," said Miss Pross in a smothered tone. "You shall not draw it. I'm stronger than you. I bless heaven for it. I will hold you till one of us faints or dies." Madame Defarge's hands were at her bosom. Miss Pross looked up, saw what it was, and struck at it, struck out a flash and a crash, and stood alone, blinded with smoke suddenly. All of this was in a second. As the smoke cleared, leaving an awful stillness, it passed out on the air like the soul of the furious woman whose body was now lifeless on the ground. In the first fright and horror of her situation, Miss Pross passed the body as far away as she could and ran down the stairs to call for help. Happily, she bethought herself of the consequences of what she did in time to check herself short and go back. It was dreadful to go in that door again, but she did, and even went near the body to get the bonnet and the other things she must wear. These she put on, out on the staircase, first shutting and locking the door and taking the key. She then sat upon the stairs for a few minutes to breathe and to cry. Then she got up and hurried away. By good fortune, she had a veil on her bonnet, or she could hardly have gone along the streets without being stopped. By good fortune, too, she was naturally so peculiar in appearance as not to show disfigurement like another woman. She needed these advantages, for the marks of gripping fingers were deep in her face, and her hair was torn, and her dress, quickly composed with shaking hands, was clutched and dragged 100 ways. In crossing the bridge, she dropped the door key into the river. Arriving at the cathedral a few minutes before her escort and waiting there, she thought, what if the key were already taken in a net? What if it were identified? What if the door were opened and the remains discovered? What if she were stopped at the gate, sent to prison, and charged with murder? In the midst of these fluttering thoughts, her escort appeared and took her in and took her away. "Is there any noise in the streets?" she asked him. "The usual noises," said Mr. Cruncher. "I don't hear you," said Miss Pross. "What did you say?" It was in vain for Mr. Cruncher to repeat what he said. Miss Pross could not hear him. "So I'll just nod my head," thought Mr. Cruncher. "At all events, she'll see that." And she did. "Is there any noise in the streets now?" said Miss Pross again. And again Mr. Cruncher nodded. "I don't hear it." "You gone deaf in an hour?" said Mr. Cruncher. "What's come over her?" I feel, said Miss Pross, as if there had been a flash and a crash, and that crash was the last thing I will ever hear in this life. Well, blessed if she isn't in a queer condition, said Mr. Cruncher, more and more disturbed. What could she have been a-taking to keep her courage up? Hark! There goes one of them dreadful carts. Can you hear that, miss? I can hear, said Miss Pross, seeing he spoke to her, nothing. Oh, my good man, there was first a great crash and then a great stillness, and that stillness seemed to be fixed and unchangeable, never to be broken as long as my life. If she don't hear the roll of them carts now very nigh at their journey's end, said Mr. Cruncher, as he looked over his shoulder, it's my opinion she'll never hear anything else in this entire world. And indeed, she never did. And that is the end of chapter 15, which I feel like was the closest to comic relief that we have ever gotten in this book. I mean, Jerry Cruncher has always sort of been a more lightly written character, I would say. But Miss Pross at ending Madame Defarge in a hugging contest that ended in gunfire could almost be played as slapstick if you tried hard enough. Anyway, I think, let me double check. But yeah, we only have one chapter left, which we will do tomorrow. If you haven't voted already, there is a community tab post up with a poll in it for what book we should read next beginning on Saturday. It is a tie right now, or at least it was a tie the last time I looked, between Alice in Wonderland and Heidi. But there are 3 books in contention, so vote for your favorite. And if your favorite doesn't win, well, don't worry, because the ones that don't win just go back into the pool for the next novel. So with that, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for helping me make it through old Charles Dickens and all of his words. And I will see you tomorrow.